so much for sharing space with us today. I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Naomi Guerrero. I am Museum Specialist for Latinx Studies at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I will be introducing our incredible, amazing presenter today. So Keisha Oliver is the Assistant Professor of Art and Design at the University of the Bahamas. And I will go ahead and read the abstract for her talk to set some context. For art museums in the Caribbean, their decolonial agenda as part of a larger global liberation project should seek to decenter institutional voices. This is especially important for national art museums who are charged with safeguarding national cultures, histories, and identities. When developing communication models that are more inclusive, museums will need to consider the global shifts toward pluralism. Tomorrow's Caribbean museums must be reframed within a multinational context to meet the needs of dynamic audiences of both resident and non-resident populations to its country. Many Caribbean people feel alienated from their national museums, and museum language plays a significant part. This presentation focuses on the particularities of museums in the Anglophone Caribbean and the relationship between language and belonging. She will explore some of the barriers of access that museum language and the English language enact as tools of cultural hegemony through their written and spoken forms. Welcome, let's round of applause. Okay, so remember, stay right here. Okay, don't move. You got the clicker? Yes, okay. I'll be right there.
Okay. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. And so, yes, there's been some slight changes. You know, I'm in grad school, so things change slightly, but not too much. My broader doctoral research kind of traces mid-20th century transcultural art education movement between the Bahamas and the United States, but here today I'm really talking about my research in museum studies, obviously museum education specifically, and how I advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in the US-based institutions that I'm working at, and how I propose to implement these in the Bahamas. And so my presentation really shares work from two projects, one research-based and the other museum education-based, and how I've been engaged with these through Penn State's Palmer Museum of Art. And so university art museums like the Palmer you see here serve as significant sites of innovation by providing a unique opportunity for challenging traditional museum practices like communication, conventions, and employing the critique on museum language as a point of departure. So I really pulled this work into the Caribbean art museum context by looking at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, as you see there to the far left, your right, and asking how and what may be required to apply the methodology that I will share to NAGB's communication practices. There's a lot of clicking here. And so when developing communication models that are more inclusive, museums should consider the global shifts towards pluralism. And so these images here of my friend, I know he's going to hate me for this, but I took a friend of mine to the Bahamas in 2022, and these are images that show him viewing the 10th national exhibition titled Mercy in December of that year. And the juxtaposition here really reflects the tensions of how he as a museum visitor struggled with, to my left here, to grapple with the exhibition curatorial statement. But then on the right, and you can see because it's a still, but his excitement at the kind of community engagement, right? This wall of written text that had so much emotion, so much life. And so he was really kind of captivated by that. And so the issue is not that he didn't understand what the curator was saying, but that it wasn't engaging. It was very exclusionary for him in tone. And so what audience was the curator writing to, and what for? And so museum language generally kind of refers to the specific ways in which these institutions communicate with museum professionals, like many of you here in the room, visitors, scholars, and the broader public, through exhibits, signage, etc. And so my interest in museum language is specifically concerned with art interpretation frameworks and how language is central to art museum visitor engagement in the US and in the Caribbean. And so for art museums like the Palmer and national art museums like the NAGB, language is particularly important in this transference of knowledge and cross-cultural meaning making. So using the case study of the Palmer Museum of Art's 50th anniversary exhibition, looking at who we are, and the exhibitions that I refer to have a lot to do with identity, have a lot to do with shared experiences, and so this was on display in 2022. And so I explore these barriers of access that art interpretation through object labels present as tools of cultural hegemony. And I'm asking what institutions are in, who are in service to the public, what are they perpetuating by using exclusionary semantic practices? Who really feels welcomed in these spaces? And so my introduction to this work really foregrounded my academic experience and my professional experience as an immigrant student worker, navigating the structural barriers of a predominantly white university and museum. And drawing from this Black feminist perspective, I'm really interested in employing this kind of participatory project in collaboration with other student workers who felt othered in some way, right? Not any specific way. And so together we're recasting meaning making through art interpretation for museum object labels in the Palmer Museum's Look at Who We Are exhibition. And so it's really about amplifying these voices, marginalized voices, central to the work. And I really wanted to push back on the museum's tradition of the white dominant voice that in the curation of this exhibition really didn't reflect diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I chose to decenter the dominant culture through student worker perspectives that factored in age, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability, and nationality to foster inclusionary perspectives that constituted and reflected the diverse community in the museum that the museum was serving. And so the project really envisioned this radical shift where communities became the voice of the museum, specifically how everyday people, such as students, can replace the institutional voice and tone with co-curated messaging. So in this spirit of community authorship, I propose the erasure of the authoritative and academic voice to object descriptions that have historically framed museum text as static. Instead, the proposal really considered digital alternatives to object labels, like we use LCD screens, we use laptops, and these liberated the museum language to transform visitor engagement. And so while technology is a novel, which really here is the conceptual intervention is the centering of the community voice. And we're gonna play a video. I don't have it on my screen, but they're gonna bring it up for me, that gives you that authentic kind of undertone that engages the audience over the curator's voice. So IT's gonna work with me and get that up for you. And so the young lady speaking, her name is Anna, and she's of mixed heritage, Latin American mother, European father.
Of Germany, and where I was raised. So I had an automatic attraction to the work because of that. But I also feel attracted to this because of the various references that they have in this painting and this triptych to, art from the Renaissance, other more contemporary artists. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Um,
And so her really unscripted response and this unpolished kind of video production here, it really creates this more authentic experience, right? Where we feel like that could be us, right? That could be your daughter, that could be your sister. And what she's talking about relates to her lived experience. So we're talking about the lived experience becoming knowledge. And so while I won't go into the, oh, my clicker is not working. Tech, make me look good. There we go. And so I really won't go into the specificity and the nuances of what I did as far as dissecting and exploring what was happening in the object labels. But what was interesting is that, again, I worked with the museum in 2022, and what we see to the left is a very kind of colonial, authoritative kind of perspective on how object labels should be constructed. And then to the right, you can see they're kind of taking in some of the feedback, right? They're actually in a new space in 2024, and they're including student voices as kind of like authors of these labels, but they're also including a QR code that includes an interactive map that shows a very visual kind of interpretation of who the artist is, what the work is about, and it creates a more engaging visitor experience. And so moving to the second project I started and completed this past summer, I wanted to remove my voice. Remove me from the picture completely as a contributor to the art interpretation and center those of the community, in this case, the people from Pennsylvania. And so feel free to scan this QR code. This exhibition is entitled Made in PA. It was the inaugural exhibition of the Palmer Museum at the Penn State. Features 30 artists from Pennsylvania or that are living in Pennsylvania. And sorry if you didn't scan it, I am so jumpy. Here you go again. I see some people with their phones still up. But I just wanted you to have access to the actual virtual tour experience, because as a resource, come on, clicker. It is not clicking. There we go. And so these are some of the slides that show the thematic sections of the experience. But what was central here is that I'd had the experience working in 2022 and bringing this forward to 2024 to expand on some of the skills that I'd learned working with the student workers to work with other Pennsylvanians, right? Center their voices, community voices from Pennsylvania, talking about artists from Pennsylvania and removing me as a Bahamian from that experience altogether, from that perspective. And so here we have some of the specifics from mathematics section, pop and politics, and we're going to go to this next video, which features a community response from Irvin Moore, who you see there in the center, who is actually a friend of mine, became a friend of mine. He was incarcerated for 52 years. He works at Penn State in the Restorative Justice Initiative, and he's from North Philadelphia. And I chose to pair him with an artist from Philadelphia. I had no idea that this artist was also from North Philadelphia at that stage of the project. And I learned that they were born in the same year, lived 2 blocks away from each other. So it was so amazing to see how he responded to that knowledge. So we're going to play this quick video just to get some insight.
Barclay L. Hendricks is an African-American artist who, like myself, was born in North Philadelphia. He is most celebrated for his life-size oil paintings of African-American men and women who he displayed in their most dignified, regal, and uplifting attire stances. It was the era of Black is Beautiful, and he began to show the world just what that meant. Hendricks also expressed his love for basketball, a sport common to most neighborhoods, especially in poor, underserved communities where Hendricks grew up. He used the colors, shapes, and images of things basketball in many of his paintings created during the 1960s and 70s. Father, Son, and is one such painting, displaying 3 separate depictions of a basketball backboard, hoop, and pole. each painted in 3 different degrees of darkness, shadow, and light. The title of the piece invokes an almost spiritual or religious relationship that the altar of basketball has to many people in the black community.
So what we see here is, in my experience working with this project, is that, you know, it really affirmed hearing Irvin speak about this artist that he had no idea that that little boy who grew up 2 blocks down the road from him became this very accomplished artist. Oh, snap, sorry. And you know, it really shows this importance, like I said, the lived experience of community members and what that contributes as far as knowledge. And I think oftentimes we mistake and we push back on these ideas because of the colonial mindset that is still embedded in the thinking of curators and administrators and museum professionals that frame the contributions of the academic knowledge, the trained museum professional, as being superior knowledge, right? And so the reflection that Irvin made in response to Hendricks' work was personal, right? Because it was from a time and a place that was, for him, a memory that then is embedded in all of our minds right now. And so art interpretation here is very unique because he's not theorizing from a learned experience or perspective, he's theorizing from life. And so the language used in museum often kind of assumes this academic kind of specialist knowledge. And so these projects that I've worked on, really experimenting with this idea of power and potential of voice in my research in the open interpretation, and then producing that kind of educational resource to the right, really centered knowledge and co-creation in my work. And so it really equipped me these skills and the tools and the measures of identifying language barriers, particularly relevant to decentering dominant language in art interpretation. And we see some here. I don't know if you can see, they're quite low on the screen. But these are some of the ways in which we, in the institutions that we work in, the institutions that we visit, can identify what at the start can be, again, causing groups of people, individuals, not to feel welcomed in these spaces. So language accessibility, having materials, translation materials, audio guides that speaks to the languages that the users, your visitors, are acquainted with. Cultural relevance, the museums oftentimes fail to reflect the cultural backgrounds or experiences of diverse communities. And so that may make people feel unwelcome. And lastly, these exclusionary narratives, when museums persist with these certain histories that exclude marginalized groups. And here again, we're talking about decentering dominant language, engage, collaborate, and critique. This is again 3 things that were very integral to this work, and looking at the fact I have local but also indigenous languages, right? What does that mean to tap into indigenous language and not always use the Eurocentric English, quote unquote, because we think that's mainstream, because we think that's most accessible? How can language in this instance of engagement be centered? Collaborating with student workers initially, but then collaborating with the people in Pennsylvania to give those perspectives that I couldn't bring as a Bahamian. And lastly, critiquing, being critical and feeling that you are in a safe space to do so in honoring agency of participants. And so moving this to the context of the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, here we're looking at the Act of 2003 and then the vision statement. And we see here how it's focusing on public interest, but who is the museum's public? Are these artists, are these museums professionals, or are they my mother, my sister, my cousin, my friend? Who are these people that they're referencing? And again, it mentions here in the vision statement, active participants in writing their own stories. This is something that the museum is saying that they are committed to in their vision statement. But this exhibition here that we're looking at, The Nation and the Imaginary, really we see in their social media engagement. Here we see website, curatorial statement on the website, we see a creators talk being advertised, we see Facebook invites, we see Instagram this is an example of them engaging with their publics, but we see oftentimes the material, the language used that is dissected from the curatorial statement does not always resonate with people of different age groups, with people from different backgrounds. And so how can we think through the ways of making this more accessible? And so asking these questions: who feels welcome? Who is the museum's public? And what tone is being used is important. So coming down to the last few slides here, this is a curatorial statement. I know that's very blurry, but the question here, and I think this is a misstep, is that they're identifying in that last pink line that's underlined that Bahamian artists are really a target audience. And I think that's a misstep if Bahamians at large should be a target audience. And the language that's being used, often some of these words are inaccessible, in the sense transcending colonial ideation. You know, which everyday Bahamian, Caribbean, international visitor coming to this space can that resonate with? And so lastly here, we have these as five ways in which we can look at decentering museum language within art museums in the Caribbean. And I think for me, this is what I would like to move forward, working with the NAGB on a project that looks like how we can make language being centered within the programming, looking at different communities, like we have a huge Haitian community, and how translated text can make those members of our community feel more welcomed. And so that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. If you have questions, those are my social media handles.
Hello? Okay. So, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We have time for one question. I know there's probably a lot, but does anyone have a pressing question that we would like to ask? No questions? Okay.
First, I want to thank you for that amazing presentation. Thank you so much. If you could talk a little bit about what the steps were to create those community relationships, right? How you found a way to connect artists with members of the community, how that relationship planned out. Just take us through the backstory, a bit of that as well.
Yeah, I think for me, becoming really invested in not only the project, but the person involved, I think is very important. And so, for instance, Irvin, for example, you know, he's someone that I try to censor him a lot because of his marginality. You know, being formerly incarcerated, that puts you in a position where you don't always feel comfortable, right? You know, people stigmatize you. And so building relationships that are meaningful, lifelong for me, because I think, like, again, you know, the community knowledge creation for me is so special when you hear that response in comparison to, I'm sad to say, our responses, right? That learned academic, this is what it should sound like. And so over like the Made in PA exhibition project was about 3 months. And so I spent, from I got there in July, the entire time creating the relationships that were needed, because not everyone in the community feels confident enough to feel like, is this gonna be okay? They often ask that, and you have to encourage them. You have to say that you want to step back so that they can be brought forward. And I think for me that was special, because when they see the final works, they share that with their families, they become more invested in what a museum is.